Lily had this way of making everything about her dress, her ideas, her life. I was only always the background noise, the person who made everything happen so she could shine. But tonight, at the Christmas dinner table, she had overstepped with a toast to family and to those who know how to appreciate the finer things in life. The jab was unmistakable. Her eyes locked on me, and the laughter echoed. That was the last straw. The moment I decided everything would change. So I smiled, walked out, and was going to make her regret it. Subscribe below if you haven't, because what's about to come will leave you on edge. It was Christmas Eve, and I was standing in front of my mirror, adjusting my sweater for the 100th time. The red one, the one I wore every year, because it was comfortable, familiar, and simple. I never liked to draw attention to myself, especially not in front of Lily, my cousin, the star of every family gathering. I had always felt the difference between us, even as kids. She was loud, confident, always the one at the center of attention, with her perfect hair, her perfect clothes, her perfect life. I was the one who stayed in the background, who made sure everyone had a good time without ever asking for anything in return. It's funny how easily people forget the ones who keep things together, especially when it's so effortless for them to appear flawless. And tonight? Tonight was no different. I had received the invitation 2 weeks ago. "Join us for a wonderful Christmas dinner," she wrote, all bubbly and warm in her message, as if she had the best intentions. But I knew better. I knew Lily. She loved to put on a show, especially when the family gathered, especially at Christmas. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to be about her. Still, I was conflicted. I hadn't been to one of her gatherings in years. I had made myself scarce, not because I didn't want to be around family, but because every time I showed up, it felt like I was walking into a trap. It was a game to her, a performance. And I was her supporting act, meant to stay in the shadows and help her shine. But this year, something was different. I couldn't place it, but I felt like I had reached my limit. Maybe it was the way she always managed to make her life sound so much more glamorous than mine, as though my ordinary life wasn't worth acknowledging. Maybe it was the way she would always get that little extra bit of attention, even if it was at my expense. Her barbs were always subtle, wrapped up in laughter, in jokes, but they hurt nonetheless. I arrived at her house late in the evening, just as the sun was setting. The lights twinkled on the enormous Christmas tree in the front yard, the glow spilling out into the street. It was the picture, perfect scene. I parked my car in the driveway, glancing at the other vehicles lined up along the curb, her friends, her colleagues, people I didn't know, all here to witness her Christmas spectacle. I rang the doorbell, and Lily's mother opened the door with a smile. "You made it," she beamed. I smiled politely, brushing past her, but the warmth of the house only made me feel more out of place. The scent of fresh pine mixed with the overpowering smell of food and candles, and the soft sound of carols filled the air. Inside, it was just as I had expected. Everything meticulously arranged, every corner of the room glowing with perfection. Lily was standing in the center, as usual, greeting guests with a smile too bright to be genuine. "Look who's here," she said, her voice too sweet, too rehearsed. Her eyes sparkled as she crossed the room to me. "I'm so glad you could make it." I nodded. "Thanks for inviting me." She smiled, but I could see that familiar gleam in her eyes, the one that said she was already thinking about how the evening would play out, how she would control the narrative, how every moment would be about her. She guided me toward the drinks, chatting away about her new job, her perfect little apartment, her recent trips to Europe. It was all so carefully curated, like a magazine spread come to life. She never once asked about me, never once acknowledged how hard I worked, how much I sacrificed. But that's Lily. Always about her. I tried to push it out of my mind. I didn't want to be the bitter cousin, the one who always noticed what others didn't. But it was hard to ignore when it was so glaringly obvious. The dinner began. We all gathered around the table, and I found myself seated near the back, tucked between two strangers. Everyone else was laughing, talking, catching up. But I wasn't part of their world. I could feel the invisible line separating me from them, the line that Lily had drawn so carefully, so effortlessly. Dinner passed in a blur, more small talk, more glances, more hints of superiority in Lily's voice when she spoke about her life. I could feel the weight of her eyes on me when I tried to contribute to the conversation, as though she was calculating whether I was saying the right thing, doing the right thing, standing in the right spot. It wasn't long before she stood up, raising her glass with a practiced grin. "To family," she began, her voice ringing out, "and to those who know how to appreciate the finer things in life." The words hung in the air like a venomous cloud. I knew exactly what she was doing. It was a dig, a jab aimed straight at me, at my life, at everything I was and everything I wasn't. She had made it clear in that moment. She was in control. She was the one who decided who belonged. And I was not in that circle. The laughter that followed echoed in my ears. I felt my cheeks burn, my throat tighten. I could feel the old reflex coming, the one where I would just smile, nod, and let it slide. But this time was different. This time, I didn't need to play her game. I didn't need to sit there quietly and let her make a fool of me again. I stood up slowly, forcing a smile that felt like a knife in my mouth. "I think I'll be going," I said, my voice steady, even though inside I was shaking. Lily's eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed with that look I knew so well, the one that said she didn't understand how anyone could walk away from her. The room quieted, every eye on me. And then, without another word, I turned and walked out of that perfect, glittering house. The cold night air hit me like a wave of relief. The harshness of it, the chill in my lungs, felt better than anything I had experienced in years. For the first time, I wasn't the person left behind, watching others live their perfect lives from the shadows. I wasn't the one who played along. I wasn't the background noise anymore. This time, I was going to make them listen. And it would start with Lily. I left her house that night without a second thought. The cool air was sharp against my skin, and every breath I took felt like a victory. The drive back home was almost surreal. No more playing by her rules. No more pretending that her world was something I wanted to be part of. I had made my decision. I was done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I pulled into my driveway, turning the engine off with a sense of finality. The house was dark, quiet. My house. The one that had always been mine. The one I had built brick by brick, piece by piece. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, glancing at the screen. Of course, there were a few messages. The first one was from Lily. No surprise there. "Where did you go? It's Christmas." I stared at the message for a moment, my fingers hovering over the keys. I could already imagine her voice, sweet, dripping with faux concern, trying to play it off like she hadn't just thrown a knife in my direction. She wanted me to come back. She wanted me to beg for her acceptance. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I tossed my phone aside, choosing instead to focus on the quiet. But then, a few minutes later, it buzzed again. This time, it was from my sister, Mia. "What happened? Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a moment longer. Mia had always been my sounding board, the one person who truly understood me. She knew what it was like to grow up in Lily's shadow, to be ignored and pushed aside while Lily took center stage. Mia had long since stopped showing up at family events, unable to stomach the fake smiles and passive-aggressive comments. She had cut ties with them years ago. I typed out a quick reply. "I'm fine. Just needed a change. Don't worry about me." The phone buzzed again, but this time, it was a message I wasn't expecting. "I'm sorry about earlier," the message read. It was from my mother. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My mother, who had always been the one to remind me that family was everything, that we needed to stick together, that we had to make compromises. She never said it outright, but I knew how she felt about my strained relationship with Lily. It was a constant undercurrent, something that was always there, even if no one spoke it aloud. "I just think you overreacted," the message continued. "Lily didn't mean anything by it. It's Christmas. Please don't let this come between you and the family." I read it twice, letting the words sink in. My mother had always favored Lily. I knew that, even though she never openly admitted it. Lily was the golden child, the one who always did things right, the one who excelled at everything. She had always been my mother's little princess, while I was the one who kept quiet, the one who did the work in the background, always putting others before myself. I felt my anger begin to simmer again. I typed a response, but stopped before I hit send. I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep living like this, pretending that it didn't hurt every time my mother made excuses for Lily, every time she asked me to swallow my pride for the sake of family. Instead, I put the phone down and walked to the kitchen, pulling out a bottle of wine from the cabinet. I didn't feel like answering anyone tonight. I didn't feel like explaining myself. I just needed to unwind. As I poured myself a glass, I thought about the night's events again, replaying every moment in my mind. I couldn't let this go. Lily thought she could mock me, make me feel small, and then carry on like everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. I was done being the second choice, the afterthought. I was done letting her dictate the terms of my life. She had humiliated me for the last time, and she didn't even realize it yet. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let Lily walk away from this unscathed, like she always did. She needed to understand that there were consequences for her actions, that the world didn't revolve around her perfect little life, that there were people, like me, who had their own lives, their own stories, and they deserved respect. I finished my wine and stood up, walking over to my desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out a stack of papers, old contracts, receipts, and notes. I started flipping through them, each page reminding me of the years I had spent sacrificing for the family, for the appearance of everything being fine. I had put so much of myself into keeping up this facade. But now I was done. Lily had crossed the line tonight, and I wasn't just going to walk away. This wasn't going to be one of those things I brushed off for the sake of family. This was the moment I had been waiting for, even if I hadn't realized it until now. It was time for her to see the consequences of her actions. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but Lily would regret the way she had treated me. I would make sure of it. For the first time, I wasn't the one who would be forgotten. I was going to make them remember me. The days that followed were quiet. At first, I wondered if I had done the right thing. Walking out of Lily's perfect Christmas dinner felt like stepping into a new world. But the silence that followed weighed on me. I could feel the ripple of my actions, the distance it created between me and everyone who had always chosen her over me. The next morning, I got to work. I knew Lily's life was built on a foundation of things that appeared perfect to the outside world. But it wasn't the big things that would bring her down. It was the little cracks, the ones people didn't see, the ones that would slowly erode her picture. perfect world. And I knew just where to start. I made the call that afternoon, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number. I wasn't nervous, just determined. The phone rang twice before a woman's voice picked up. "Hello, Elegant Events. How can I help you?" "I'm calling about a wedding I've worked with you on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, professional. "The Bricks, Callahan wedding. I'm concerned about a payment issue." There was a brief pause before she responded. "Oh yes, of course. Let me pull up the information. One moment, please." I heard her typing in the background, a slight clacking of keys, and my mind raced as I imagined what Lily would think if she knew I was in control of the situation now. She had always been the one pulling the strings, controlling the narrative. But now? Now it was my turn. When the woman returned to the line, she had all the details. "Yes, we received the deposit for the venue, but the final payment is still due. That balance is $8,000, and it needs to be settled by 3 p.m. today, or we will be unable to continue services." I smirked to myself. "Actually, I'm going to have to cancel the payment. I don't think we're moving forward with the event." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long. "Excuse me? You're canceling?" "Yes. Please cancel the services. I'll make sure to let the other vendors know." I could hear the panic in her voice. "But ma'am, that would be a breach of contract. The wedding will be canceled, and the vendors will not be able to fulfill their services." "That's exactly what I'm going for," I said, my voice cold, determined. "Cancel everything. I'll handle it from here." The woman hesitated, clearly not knowing how to respond. After a few seconds, she spoke again. "We will have to process this as a cancellation. Are you sure this is what you want to do?" I let the question hang in the air. "Yes, I'm sure." I hung up the phone before she could say another word, and sat back in my chair, a strange feeling of satisfaction washing over me. This was it. This was the beginning. It wasn't just about taking down Lily's perfect little world. It was about proving that I didn't have to stay in the shadows anymore. I sat there for a moment, letting the power of my decision sink in. I could already imagine the chaos unfolding at the venue. The wedding, the one Lily had worked so hard to make flawless, would now fall apart at the seams. And she would have no one to blame but herself. She couldn't control everything, no matter how hard she tried. I spent the rest of the day making more calls, each one more satisfying than the last. I wasn't just pulling strings behind the scenes anymore. I was the one making decisions. I was the one causing the ripples. When the sun set that evening, I could already feel the storm brewing. I had set things in motion, and there was no turning back now. I was going to make Lily regret ever underestimating me. The next day came with a sense of anticipation that hummed beneath my skin. I had already set the wheels in motion, and now all I had to do was sit back and watch. Part of me was surprised at how calm I felt, considering what I had just done. But then again, this wasn't just any decision. It was the decision to stop being silent, to stop being invisible. And that kind of power was intoxicating. I spent the morning doing what I always did, cleaning, organizing, making sure my space was perfect. It was a way of grounding myself, of focusing on something other than the whirlwind I had set in motion. But in the back of my mind, I kept imagining Lily's face when the news hit. I could almost see it, the tight smile, the confusion, the realization that she no longer had control. At lunch, my phone buzzed again. It was Lily. "I'm coming over in an hour. We need to talk. Where are you?" She had probably caught wind of the storm. I sat down on the couch, staring at the message. She was coming over? Of course she was. She needed to fix things, to figure out how to smooth over the mess I had made. Part of me wanted to ignore the message entirely, let her stew in the chaos for a while longer. But I knew I couldn't just leave it at that. Not yet. I responded, "I'll be here." When she arrived, I could hear the clack of her heels on the front steps before she even knocked. She was always in a hurry, always rushing from one thing to the next. But today, I was the one in control. Today, I wasn't the one waiting for her to make the next move. I opened the door to her standing there, her perfect hair slightly askew, but her smile was the same, a little too bright, a little too rehearsed. "Hi," she said, her voice chipper. "We need to talk about what happened at Christmas." I stepped aside to let her in, closing the door behind her. She immediately glanced around, her eyes scanning my modest living room like she was taking inventory. There was no grand chandelier here, no perfectly arranged furniture. It wasn't her world. "Nice place," she said, her tone casual, but I could tell she wasn't really impressed. "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She took a seat on the couch, perching herself carefully, like she was still trying to maintain some semblance of control. "Look, I know things got a little out of hand last night, but you have to understand, family is important to me. I just want everything to be perfect." I could feel her eyes on me, searching for some sign of weakness, some hint that I was going to back down. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that said I knew exactly what was coming. "You think everything has to be perfect," I said, my voice low. "But that's just it, isn't it? You don't want perfect, Lily. You want control." Her smile faltered for a second, just enough for me to see the crack in her armor. She quickly regained composure, but I could tell the words had hit their mark. "Control?" she asked, a little too defensively. "What are you talking about?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms over my chest. "You've spent your entire life controlling the narrative. You've always had to be the center of attention, always had to be the one everyone admires. And when someone doesn't fall in line, when someone doesn't play the part you expect, you shut them out. You make them feel small." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly, but I could see the shift in her expression. She wasn't used to being talked to like this. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, her voice softening. "I didn't realize." "Oh, I know you didn't realize," I interrupted, the frustration in my voice slipping through despite my best efforts. "Because it's never been about me. It's never been about anyone but you." There was a silence between us then, a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Lily looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in a long while, and I could see the flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I never meant to make you feel like that," she said, more quietly now. "But I wasn't going to let her off that easy." "You did, Lily. You've been doing it for years." Her eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, and I could tell she was trying to gather herself. She wasn't used to being called out like this. Most people let her get away with it, let her control the room, control the conversation. But not me. Not anymore. "I never asked for any of this," I continued, my voice growing steadier. "I never asked to be a backdrop in your life, to be the person who made everything happen so you could shine. But I'm done with it. I'm done being invisible. And if that means I have to break the perfect little world you've built for yourself, then so be it." For the first time, I saw her hesitate. I saw her discomfort, her confusion. She wasn't the one in charge anymore. "Why now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? After all these years?" I stood up then, pacing slowly across the room. "Because I finally realized something. I don't need you. I don't need your approval, and I don't need your perfection. What I need is to stop pretending that you're the only one who matters. What I need is to finally take control of my own life. There was a long pause. Then she stood too, her expression unreadable. "You're really going to do this? You're going to ruin everything?" I turned to face her, my voice firm. "No, Lily. You're the one who's been ruining everything. I'm just giving you a taste of your own medicine." She didn't respond right away. She just stood there, her eyes locked on mine, a mix of confusion and realization beginning to settle in. For the first time in as long as I could remember, she was the one unsure of herself. And I didn't feel sorry for her. I had made my decision. And nothing, not even her perfect smile, was going to make me back down now. The days that followed Lily's visit were strangely quiet. I kept expecting her to reach out again, to try to fix things, to apologize, or somehow spin the situation back in her favor. But she didn't. The first crack came on a Tuesday morning. It was a message from my mother, short, simple, and to the point. "Lily's in trouble. She needs you." The words stung in a way I wasn't prepared for. They weren't even trying to sugarcoat it anymore. They knew what had happened, knew that I was the one who had caused the crack in their perfect little world. The fact that it was my mother asking for help, asking me to come back, to fix the problem, hit me harder than I wanted to admit. I let the message sit for a few minutes, my thumb hovering over the screen, uncertain of how to respond. The old reflex kicked in, the one where I would rush in to help, to pick up the pieces and make everything better. The one where I would be the martyr, sacrificing my own peace for the sake of the family. But I wasn't that person anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything I had let happen. So I did nothing. I didn't respond. I didn't call. Instead, I put the phone down and went about my day. But by that evening, the silence was unbearable. My thoughts kept drifting back to that one simple message from my mother. "She needs you." It was a pull, a tug at something inside of me that still wanted to be the person who fixed things, the person who made everything right. And maybe that's what they were counting on. That I would cave, that I would go back to my old role, waiting in the wings, playing my part in their game. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. That night, as I sat on my couch, the phone buzzed again. This time it was from Lily. "I need to talk. I don't know who else to turn to." I stared at the message for a long time, the words twisting something deep inside me. She was asking for my help. The very same person who had spent years making me feel invisible. The same person who had spent every family event trying to diminish my presence was now begging me for assistance. I felt a strange calm wash over me, a sense of finality that I hadn't expected. The old me, the one who always said yes, the one who always showed up when they needed something, was gone. She had walked out of Lily's life, and that person wasn't coming back. But still, part of me hesitated. I had to at least hear her out. So I responded with a single word. "When?" She replied almost immediately. "Can you meet me at the cafe tomorrow? I'll explain everything." I didn't want to go. I really didn't. But I knew this conversation was inevitable. And when I walked into that cafe the next morning, I could feel the weight of everything that had led me here. I was no longer walking in as the person who had always been there to clean up Lily's messes. I was walking in as someone who was finally ready to demand respect. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner booth by the window, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. The usual confidence was gone, replaced by something I hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Her shoulders were slumped, her usual sharp posture softened, as though she were still trying to figure out how to approach me. She looked up as I walked in, her face softening just a little. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice quiet, almost unsure. I sat across from her, my hands folded on the table. What's going on, Lily? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Why didn't you just deal with this yourself? She swallowed, her eyes flickering away. I messed up, okay? I didn't think it would get this bad. I waited for her to continue, but she hesitated, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and desperation. Everything I've built, it's falling apart. The wedding, everything. It's all just unraveling, and I don't know what to do. I thought I had it under control, but now it's too late. I leaned back in my chair, watching her with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. You've always had control, Lily. That's how you've kept everyone at arm's length, made sure you were the one everyone turned to. So what happened? She closed her eyes for a moment, a deep breath escaping her lips. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I thought I could make everything perfect, but I didn't see it, didn't see you, until it was too late. And there it was. The apology I had waited for, though not in the form I had expected. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I saw a crack in her carefully curated image. But was it enough? I'm not the person you can control anymore, Lily, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I've been invisible for too long, and I'm not going back. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes searching mine for something, understanding, forgiveness, maybe even a way to fix things. But I wasn't here to fix things. Not anymore. I'll help you, but on my terms, I said finally. If you want me in your life, you have to understand that I won't be the one you can use to patch up your mistakes. I'm done playing that role. The words hung between us, heavy with the truth. I wasn't sure what would come next, or if anything would ever be the same again, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the one who needed fixing. Not anymore. The next few days felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to maintain my balance while everything around me seemed to teeter on the edge. Lily's apology had hung in the air between us, fragile and unspoken, as though neither of us was sure if it was enough. I hadn't let myself believe it would be. I had heard the regret in her voice, seen the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, but something about it didn't sit right. She hadn't changed. Not yet. She hadn't fully understood what I needed. The old reflexes, the ones that kept her in control, were still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to reassert themselves when she thought no one was watching. But there was something else too, something that I hadn't expected. As much as I hated to admit it, I felt a shift inside myself. A part of me wanted to forgive her, to go back to the way things had been before everything fell apart. I wasn't sure if it was out of habit, or if it was because I still loved her, in a way. But there was a deeper truth that I couldn't ignore anymore. I had spent my whole life putting others first, erasing myself in the process. Always there to pick up the pieces, always there to make sure everyone else had what they needed. And for what? So that I could be overlooked when it mattered most? This time, I was putting myself first, and I was going to make sure Lily understood that. I didn't expect her to change overnight, but I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to get there either. I had waited too long, let too many things slide for the sake of family, for the sake of peace. It was time for me to carve out a space where I was seen, not as an afterthought, but as someone who mattered. That afternoon, I received another text from Lily. This time, it was short and simple, just like the first one had been, but there was a tone to it that made my stomach twist. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what to do anymore. Can we talk again? The words echoed in my mind as I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the keyboard. I didn't know what I expected her to say, but it certainly wasn't this. I had to admit, a part of me was still angry, still raw from everything that had happened. But another part of me recognized something else in her message. A desperation, yes, but also a kind of surrender. Maybe she was starting to understand that she couldn't fix everything with just words. I took a deep breath before typing out my reply. I'll meet you tomorrow. But we need to talk about what's really going on, Lily. No more pretending. When I showed up at the cafe the next day, I was prepared for anything. I had steeled myself against the thought of falling back into old patterns, back into the role I had always played in her life. But there was no going back. Not now. She was sitting in the same spot as before, her eyes downcast as if she were waiting for something to happen, something to change. But I wasn't here to make things easier for her anymore. I was here to make sure that this time, she saw me. Really saw me. Not just as the person who helped her pick up the pieces when her life fell apart, but as someone with a life of her own. Someone who deserved more than being overlooked. Hi, I said as I sat down across from her, my voice quieter than I intended. She looked up, meeting my eyes with a kind of wariness that made my stomach knot. I'm glad you came, she said, but her voice was unsure, almost fragile. I came because I need to know that you're serious, I said, my voice steady. You've apologized, but that's not enough. Not anymore. She flinched at my words, and for a moment, I thought she might retreat back into the defensive shell she had always hidden behind. But instead, she nodded, a tightness in her jaw that told me she was finally understanding what this was about. I know, she said quietly. I know it's not enough. I've been selfish. I've always been selfish, and I never realized what that did to you. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. You've taken so much for granted, Lily. Not just with me, but with everyone. You thought you could control everything, your image, your relationships, your perfect life. But you've hurt people along the way, people who mattered. She swallowed, her eyes darting away for a second before looking back at me. I don't know how to fix it, she whispered. I don't know where to start. I could hear the pain in her voice, but it wasn't enough to sway me. I couldn't fix this for her. I couldn't keep cleaning up the messes she made. You don't get to fix it with one apology, I said, my voice firm. You have to do the work, and I'm not going to wait around while you figure it out. Her face tightened, the familiar glint of frustration flickering in her eyes. But instead of lashing out, she just nodded, her hands folded tightly in front of her. I get it, she said, her voice small. I don't know how to make up for all the years I spent treating you like you didn't matter. You start by recognizing that I do matter, I replied. Not just when you need something, but all the time. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, not really, but the weight of what had been said hung between us. She was finally hearing it, finally understanding what it meant to be seen, to be valued. I don't know if I can fix everything, she said quietly, but I want to try, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know that I'm trying. I nodded, not sure if I was ready to forgive her just yet, but willing to let her prove herself. We'll see, I said, my voice low. We'll see if you really mean it. As I stood to leave, I could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't a resolution, not yet, but it was a beginning. Maybe this time, Lily would finally understand what it meant to be truly seen. And maybe, just maybe, I would stop letting myself be invisible. I didn't hear from Lily for a few days after our last meeting. The silence was both expected and unsettling. I wasn't sure what I had been hoping for, an apology, a grand gesture, some sign that she was finally getting it. But none of that came. Instead, There was only the quiet that stretched between us like a chasm neither of us had crossed yet. I kept myself busy, throwing myself back into work, finding solace in the routine of my day life. But in the moments when the house was quiet, when the only sound was the steady ticking of the clock on the wall, I couldn't help but wonder if anything had really changed. Had I really made a difference? Or had I simply set myself up for more disappointment? It was on the fourth day of silence that I finally received a message from Lily. She didn't ask to meet this time. It was simple, almost like an afterthought. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I just wanted to let you know I'm not giving up. I stared at the message for a while, unsure of what to make of it. I didn't want to rush in with any false hope, not after everything that had happened. But there was something in her words, something that wasn't as polished as before. She wasn't trying to control the conversation anymore. This wasn't her usual performance. I took a deep breath, setting the phone down on the counter. There was a part of me that wanted to respond immediately, to dive back in, to fix things. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had to remind myself that I wasn't the one who had to do all the work this time. I wasn't the one who had to keep picking up the pieces. I decided to give it a few more days. I would wait for her to make the next move, to prove that this wasn't just a fleeting moment of reflection on her part. She had to want it, really want it, if anything was going to change. The next morning, as I was getting ready for the day, I received another message from her. This time, it was more direct. I've been trying to fix things with the wedding. The vendors are pulling out, and I don't know how to make it right. Please, I need your help. I could feel my stomach twist at the words. It was clear she was in full crisis mode now. But as much as I knew I could help, knew I had the power to swoop in and save her once again, I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not this time. Instead, I simply typed, "I can't fix this for you, Lily. You have to face the consequences of your actions. I'm not going to keep picking up the pieces." I hit send before I could guess myself, my finger hovering over the screen for a moment longer than necessary. The response didn't come immediately, and I wondered if she was processing what I had said, or if she was trying to figure out how to talk her way out of this, like she always had in the past. When the reply finally came, it wasn't what I had expected. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to rationalize or explain. It was just simple, raw, and unexpected. "I'm scared. I don't know how to do this without you. I've never really known how to do anything without you." The words hit me harder than I thought they would. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, my thoughts swirling in a dozen directions at once. I had spent so much of my life resenting her, so much time wanting to be seen, wanting to break free from the role I had played for so long. And yet here she was, admitting she needed me. Not just for the wedding, not for the things I could do for her, but because, at least in some small way, she was finally seeing me. But I knew that the road to this point couldn't be paved with guilt, or with my willingness to come in and save her when things got hard. She had to learn how to stand on her own 2 feet. She had to face the mess she'd made. I took a deep breath, tapping out a reply. "You need to learn how to do this on your own, Lily. You can't keep leaning on me. It's time to take responsibility for your own life, for the choices you've made." The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't tense, but it was heavy with meaning. I wasn't sure what would happen next, or if she would finally understand that I couldn't always be the one to pick up the slack. But for the first time, I felt like I was making a real difference. Not by fixing things, but by forcing her to face the truth. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't from Lily. It was from my mother. The message was simple, but the weight of it hit me like a ton of bricks. "I know you're upset, but please, for once, Think about what's best for everyone. I sighed, staring at the screen for a long time. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. It wasn't what I needed. But it was the same thing I had always heard from her. The same plea for peace, for maintaining the illusion of a happy family at all costs. And suddenly, I realized, this was the last time I would be asked to fix things. This was the last time I would be asked to play the part of the mediator, the one who kept everything from falling apart. The difference now was that I knew how to say no. I put the phone down and stood up, looking out the window. It wasn't perfect. Nothing was. But I was starting to see a future where I wasn't just a shadow of what everyone else needed. A future where I mattered, truly mattered, on my own terms. The silence between Lily and me stretched on for days, and I found myself in a strange state of limbo. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was a kind of stillness I wasn't used to. Normally, I would have filled the void, would have tried to bridge the gap. But now, I was standing back, watching to see what she would do. This time, I wasn't going to rush in and fix everything. Not for her. Not for anyone. I spent my time doing what I needed to do: work, errands, and the occasional conversation with friends. But all the while, my mind kept returning to her. Not just to what had happened between us, but to what would happen next. Would she come around? Would she realize that she couldn't keep playing the same game? The one where I was always the one who made things right? It was on the 5th day of silence that I finally received another message from Lily. This time, there was no apology, no plea for help. It was simply, "I've realized something. I don't know how to do this alone, but I'm willing to try. Will you help me?" I stared at the words for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no sugar coating this message, no playing it safe with carefully chosen words. She was admitting that she didn't have all the answers, that she had no idea how to fix everything she had broken. But more than that, she was admitting something I hadn't expected to hear. She was ready to take responsibility. I felt a strange wave of relief wash over me, though I wasn't sure if it was the relief of finally hearing the words I had wanted to hear, or if it was the relief of knowing that she wasn't going to try to manipulate me into fixing things for her anymore. I thought about it for a long moment before responding. "I'm not going to fix things for you, Lily. But if you want to try, I'll be here. On one condition: you do the work. You make the decisions. You face the consequences." I hit send before I could guess myself. The silence that followed felt different than before. It wasn't heavy with anticipation, nor was it uncomfortable. It was more like the calm before a storm, like something was about to shift, but neither of us knew exactly what it would be. The next morning, I received her reply. It was simple, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like she wasn't just trying to control the situation. "Thank you. I'll start. I promise." I didn't know what starting looked like for her, but it was the first step. I couldn't go back to the old patterns. I couldn't let her think that I was going to rescue her, not when I knew she was capable of standing on her own. The days that followed were filled with a kind of tension that I couldn't escape. It wasn't bad tension, just the kind of uncertainty that came with change. The kind of tension that happens when both people are realizing that they've been playing different games all along. I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was on the verge of something. But was it real change, or just another phase in her cycle? I had no idea. I didn't see her again until a week later. She showed up at my door unannounced, just as I was finishing up a late dinner. I hesitated before opening the door, but I wasn't going to turn her away. Not now. When I saw her standing there, she was different. Her eyes were clear, not guarded like before, and there was no forced smile, no perfect persona. She looked raw, vulnerable even. She hadn't come to beg for help this time. She hadn't come to fix anything. She had come because she needed to face what she had done. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, her voice quiet. "And I know I've hurt you, more than I ever realized. But I'm trying to change. I'm going to fix this. Not just for the wedding, but for us. For everything." The words hung between us for a long moment, and I had to stop myself from responding immediately, from falling back into old habits. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that this was real. But the truth was, I didn't know if it was enough yet. "I don't need you to fix things for me," I said softly, looking her in the eyes. "I need you to fix things for yourself, to stop pretending that you have everything under control when you don't." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I know. I've been running from the consequences for so long, and I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to keep hurting people, especially you." Her words stung in a way I hadn't expected, not because of what she had said, but because of how true it was. She had hurt me, yes. She had hurt so many people. But now, for the first time, she wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't asking me to fix it. She was simply acknowledging what had happened. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll keep trying. I will." I didn't know if she was ready for everything that came with that promise, but it was the first real step she had taken. And that, for now, was enough. I smiled, not the kind of smile I had given her in the past, the one that hid everything, but a real smile, the kind that said I was finally seeing her, and maybe, just maybe, she was finally seeing me too. "It's a start," I said, my voice quiet. "That's all anyone can ask for." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. Not because everything had been fixed, but because it was the first time in a long time that I had let go of the idea of perfection. The first time in a long time that I had let myself be seen. The days after our conversation felt strangely calm. Lily had made her promise, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself believing that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to face the truth. There was a shift in her, a real one. But part of me still couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't quite as they seemed. The old patterns, the old behaviors, had a way of sneaking back in when you least expected it. I didn't expect a phone call. I didn't expect her to show up at my door again. But it came anyway. It was a late afternoon when the knock came, and I was standing in the kitchen, my hands buried in the sink, scrubbing away the remains of the day's dishes. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, but as soon as I heard the knock, a familiar tightness spread in my chest. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked to the door, taking a breath before I opened it. Lily stood there, her posture a little too perfect, like she was trying to hide something behind the facade of control she had so expertly crafted over the years. But there was something different in her eyes, something that made me pause before saying anything. "I'm sorry to just show up," she said, her voice tentative, like she wasn't sure how to begin. "But I wanted to talk about the wedding. I think we need to fix it, together." I took a step back, holding the door open slightly wider. "I'm listening," I said, my tone neutral. I didn't want to push her away, but I didn't want to get too involved either. This wasn't about me fixing things for her. This wasn't about me stepping back into the role I had played for years. She stepped inside, her movements careful, almost as if she were trying to avoid setting something off. "The wedding," she continued. "It's falling apart, and I can't do this without you. I don't want to lose everything I've worked so hard for, but I know I can't keep pretending anymore." I could feel the familiar pull of sympathy, of wanting to be the one who could fix everything, who could step in and save her from the mess she had created. But I was tired of playing that part. I had been the one holding everything together for so long, and it was exhausting. I wasn't going to do it anymore. "I'm not here to fix this for you, Lily," I said, my voice steady. "You need to face the consequences of what you've done. I can't keep coming in to clean up your messes." Her face fell, a flicker of panic crossing her features before she caught herself. She seemed to swallow hard before speaking again, this time quieter, more vulnerable. "I know," she said. "But this time, I'm asking for your help because I'm willing to do the work. I'm willing to change, even if it's hard." I stared at her, letting the weight of her words settle. It wasn't the same old plea. It wasn't the same manipulation. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that she was really trying. But was it enough? Was she ready to face everything that had been broken between us, between her and the rest of the family? "I'll help," I said, my voice softer now. "But only if you're willing to do it on your own. No more shortcuts. No more hiding." Her eyes met mine, and this time, I saw something different. It wasn't desperation. It was resolve. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe that was the first step toward real change. "Okay," she said, her voice steady. "I can do that." And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. The days that followed Lily's visit were full of small, quiet changes. She started making decisions for herself, real ones, the kind that couldn't be undone with a smile or a carefully placed excuse. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but there was something different about her now. Something that felt less like an act and more like a person finally willing to face their own reflection. I stayed out of it as much as I could. The whole wedding debacle still lingered in the background, but for the first time, Lily wasn't calling me every day for advice or for help. She was handling it, or at least trying to. I was working late one night when I got the text. It wasn't from Lily. It was from my mother. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, wondering what this was about. My mother didn't usually reach out like this unless there was a storm brewing. I could feel the tension building up inside me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let it go. But I couldn't. Not with the way things had been left between us. I responded with a simple, "Sure, what's going on?" She didn't waste time. The reply came almost immediately. "Lily's struggling. I don't know how to help her. Please come over." I wasn't sure what I expected, but I didn't expect this. It had only been a few days since our last conversation. A few days since Lily had admitted she was trying, that she was willing to change. So why was my mother acting like everything had already fallen apart? I took a deep breath and grabbed my keys, the familiar sense of unease settling over me. I didn't want to go back into the chaos. I didn't want to be the one to clean up Lily's mess anymore. But there was something in my mother's message that made me feel like I couldn't walk away. Maybe it was the guilt. Maybe it was the years of playing the part of the fixer. Or maybe it was just that I wasn't ready to give up on Lily completely. I arrived at my mother's house in less than half an hour. When I walked in, the atmosphere was heavy, too quiet, too still. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped in front of her, a frown pulling at the corners of her lips. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm, even though my chest felt tight. She sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's the wedding. Lily's trying, but it's not enough. The vendors are pulling out. The venue's threatening to cancel. And I just don't know what to do. She's falling apart again, and I can't fix it for her this time." I could see the strain in her eyes, the exhaustion that I had grown so familiar with over the years. She wasn't just worried about Lily anymore. She was worried about everything: the wedding, the family, the way everything was falling apart. I sat down next to her, trying to steady myself. You can't keep saving her, Mom. She has to fix it herself. She has to learn how to deal with the consequences. I know, she said, her voice small. But it's hard. She's my niece, and I just want to make it better for her. I didn't know what to say to that. How many times had I felt the same way? How many times had I tried to fix things, only to realize I couldn't? How many times had I been the one left holding everything together, only to watch it slip through my fingers? I can't fix this for you, Mom, I said quietly. And I can't fix it for Lily. She has to face it, or it'll keep happening. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with both sorrow and understanding. I know. I just want her to be happy, to find peace with herself. But I don't know how to make that happen. I know, I said softly. But she has to find it on her own. We all do. And for the first time, I realized something. I wasn't the one who needed to fix everything. Not anymore. The following days were a strange mix of relief and anticipation. I had stepped back, let Lily take the lead, and for the first time, I didn't feel the constant pull to fix things. But that didn't mean everything was smooth. It was far from it. The wedding chaos was still hanging over us, and though Lily was trying, I could tell she was still struggling to hold everything together. I didn't hear from her for a couple of days, but then one evening, I received a call. It wasn't from Lily, but from the wedding coordinator, the same one who had been so frantic in the beginning. She told me Lily had asked her to reach out. There had been a change in the schedule, and some things were finally starting to come together. The vendors were back on board, but the tension was still thick. I didn't know if I was relieved or frustrated. There was progress, but it felt like one step forward, 2 steps back. Lily wasn't ready to admit how much of a mess this had all been, and I could see it. She was walking a tightrope, trying to balance her image with the reality that everything had already fallen apart. The next day, Lily texted me, asking to meet. I could feel the weight of her words even through the screen. Can we talk? I need your help, but I don't want to mess this up again. I stared at the message, torn. Part of me wanted to keep my distance. She was trying to handle it, and I had promised myself I wouldn't step in. But another part of me knew I couldn't leave her to sink on her own. She needed something from me, and as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't ready to walk away entirely. I replied, I'm listening. We met at the same cafe where we'd talked before. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table by the window, her shoulders tense, her eyes darting around as if she were waiting for something to happen. She was still holding on to that image of herself, the one that was always polished, always in control. But it was starting to crack, and I could see it. There was no hiding it now. Hi, she said when I sat down, her voice hesitant. Thanks for meeting me. I nodded, not sure where this conversation would lead. What's going on? She let out a breath, her fingers tapping against the coffee cup. I've been trying to keep everything together, doing the right things, making the right calls. But every time I think I have a handle on it, it slips away. I feel like I'm drowning. It was the most honest thing she had said in a long time, and it made something inside me shift. I had seen her try so hard to be perfect, to make it all work without ever acknowledging the cracks beneath the surface. For the first time, I could see her willingness to face it all. I can't fix everything for you, Lily, I said softly, my voice steady. But you can't keep pretending it's all fine when it's not. She looked at me, her eyes wide, as if the weight of my words had just settled in. I know, but I don't know what to do. I've never known how to fix things without trying to control them. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar weight of years of being in her orbit, trying to make her realize that life couldn't always be perfect. You're trying to control everything again, but you can't. Sometimes you just have to let go and see what happens. Her gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability, something I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the polished version of herself she always tried to project. This was the real her, the one who was finally willing to face her own mistakes. "I want to learn how to do that," she said, her voice small but sincere. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of her words lingering in the air. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And sometimes, that was all you could ask for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet progress. Lily kept her distance, which was exactly what I needed. I wasn't sure if it was the calm before the storm, or if things were finally starting to settle into a new rhythm. But the more I observed, the more I realized she wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was changing. Slowly, but definitely. The wedding was still on, still a mess in so many ways, but it was starting to come together. The vendors were back, the venue was secured, and for the first time in months, Lily was beginning to take responsibility. Not perfectly, but honestly. She made decisions on her own, handled a few phone calls without asking for help, and more importantly, she stopped trying to make everything look perfect for everyone else. I didn't hear from her as often, which was a relief, but I knew she wasn't done yet. There was still so much left to untangle, and I couldn't help but wonder what the wedding day would bring. Would it all collapse under the pressure? Or would this be the moment where everything finally clicked? The night before the wedding, I got a call from my mother. I had expected it to be about the final details, something small that had slipped through the cracks. But when I picked up, the urgency in her voice took me by surprise. "You need to come to the wedding tomorrow," she said, her tone unsteady. "Lily needs you." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to say no, to tell her that Lily had to figure it out herself, that I wasn't going to be the one to rescue her, not this time. But the other part of me, the one that had been holding on to the hope that things might actually be different this time, knew I had to be there. Not as a fixer, not as someone who would jump in to save her, but simply as someone who cared enough to show up. "I'll be there," I said, my voice firm. I could hear the relief in her sigh, the weight she had been carrying finally lifting, even just a little. The next day, I arrived at the venue early, as I always did. I knew it was going to be chaotic. Lily's world was rarely anything but there was something about today that felt different. The air was thick with the buzz of last, minute preparations, the frantic energy of everyone trying to make sure everything was perfect. I stepped into the main hall, and there she was, Lily, pacing in front of a mirror, dressed in a silk robe, her hair still in disarray. She saw me before I could say anything, and for a moment, there was nothing but the weight of her gaze. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. She was scared. She was nervous. And most of all, she was vulnerable, in a way I had never seen before. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a mask. It was her, stripped bare, with no illusions left to hide behind. I walked over to her, placing my hand on her shoulder. "You're going to be fine," I said quietly. She nodded, though I could see the doubt still flickering in her eyes. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled softly, squeezing her shoulder. "You don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to be yourself." For the first time in so long, I saw her smile, a real one, not the kind she wore when she was trying to control everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And that was the first time in a long while that I truly believed everything was going to be okay. But there was something else. There was an authenticity in the way she stood there, no longer hiding behind the image of what she thought she should be. She was real, stripped of the masks she'd worn for so long, and in that moment, I saw a woman who had finally learned how to breathe. Her smile, though not perfect, was genuine. There were no rehearsed lines, no calculated gestures. She was simply herself, vulnerable, raw, and yet more beautiful than she had ever been. She had made mistakes. She had hurt people, including me. But she had also fought for herself, faced what needed to be faced, and found the courage to stand on her own. And for the first time, I wasn't the one holding everything together. I wasn't the one stepping in to smooth things over. The weight of the world no longer rested on my shoulders. She had carried her own load, and I realized that I had to let her. As she exchanged her vows, a quiet wave of relief washed over me. The future wasn't certain, and the past wasn't erased, but in this moment, it didn't matter. She had chosen to move forward, not as the perfect version of herself, but as the true version, the woman I always knew she could be. The music played, and I smiled, not just for her, but for me too. For the first time, I felt the peace of letting go. In that moment, we both had the chance to finally be free, to build lives without the weight of the past holding us down. This story may have ended, but the message lingers. For more raw and real moments like this, click on the left and subscribe to walk alongside more women finding their strength. Healing takes time, but it's possible.